the housekeeping items. Please bear with us with some technological hiccups. For those of you who joined us earlier today for the Susan Ross, there were a couple issues. Tonight, this is going to be even different. What we have is Michael deJong, our curator, as well as Scott Bradley, the executive director. And they are mobile and behind the scenes in our collection. They are using a gimbal and a mobile phone hooked up through our system at the museum to essentially walk you through where our curatorial staff work every day as a way of giving you a bit of a glimpse. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Scott. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, you can send them in through the Q&A area, and I'll ask them as we go through the different galleries. So Michael, Scott, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. This is Scott Bradley, the executive director behind the camera. And like Michelle said, there may be some technical issues tonight. So as we're moving around, there may be some dead zones for connectivity in the museum. So if we go black for a moment, just bear with us. We'll be back as soon as we can. So now we're going to go on a little tour, and I'm, as the new guy in the museum, going to be asking Michael about a lot of random artifacts. So let's see if we can stump him tonight.
Thanks, Scott. And hi, everyone. Welcome to our collection storage. So the Thunder Bay Museum has artifact collection storage on 3 separate floors. We are right on the bottom right now. We're in our, I guess you could call our basement, where we have, as you'd expect, the biggest artifacts, the biggest and heaviest artifacts. So let's go. So not going too far so far. So I'm going to start right here. Some of you may be wondering what we were talking about Star Trek, so let me explain. So this artifact right here, this chair, somewhat odd-looking chair, the reason that we have it in our collection is that was invented by a man named Mccallum. So he was born in Fort William, and he spent most of his life as an engineer in the pulp and paper industry. He also served in World War II as a lieutenant in the Canadian Forces. After the war, his engineering practice diversified a little bit, and he started to branch out into a number of different areas. In particular, he was interested in ergonomic furniture, and this chair is one of the things that resulted from that. He called this the ergoform chair. So this chair, I wasn't able to delve into our archives as much as I wanted to with the time allotted to try to figure out exactly what makes it ergonomic or so advanced. To tell you the truth, it doesn't look incredibly comfortable to me, but there must be a reason for it. But of course, that was not the reason that this chair ended up on the set of Star Trek. Rather, well, I assume simply that they were looking for something that was fairly futuristic looking without having to go ahead and invent a chair themselves. So this chair fit the bill. And as you may have seen in our in the photo that we posted on Instagram and Facebook, it's not the greatest photo, sorry. But so this chair, you can see it along the periphery of the bridge. Obviously, we're not talking about Captain Kirk's chair here. So you'd see this along the periphery of the bridge where the science and communication officers sat. So if there's any Trekkies in our audience, next time you watch original series, keep your eye out for this. I got to be clear, this physical chair was not on the set of Star Trek itself. This is a prototype of the chair that was donated to us through the Ben Cowan collection. But of course, it is the same model as the one that ended up on Star Trek. And, you know, it's just fascinating as a representation of some of the fascinating individuals from the Lakehead and how they impacted the world in all sorts of interesting ways. And I should mention here that Ben Cowan is really an interesting figure. Definitely not doing justice to him in these few minutes. An interesting figure who is definitely worth a look. And if anyone is interested in combing through our archival collection, which consists of all manner of things from diaries to all manner of engineering drawings, technical drawings, for all kinds of inventions and other sorts of things, just let me know. So that wasn't very long, but if you have any questions about that, let me know.
So Michael,
Michael, what are we going to see next?
Well, we do have one question, and I think you touched upon it. Is there anything else that stands out in that collection?
Yeah, when I was looking through it some years ago to do a presentation, one of his other inventions was a bomb sight used for military planes. Now, this is not my area, although it's more Scott's area, actually. But certainly some really fascinating technical drawings. I believe it's a system designed to basically guide bombs down to where they were supposed to go.
So kind of like a calculating gyroscopic bomb sight?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, cool.
Yes. So yeah, that too is in our archival collection. So we have a whole series of architectural drawings from that. So yeah.
All right. So what's next?
Well, let's head this way.
So what are we looking at, Michael?
So some of you probably aren't surprised to see me talking about a carousel horse, but it's kind of my thing, so I'm going to talk about it. And a few of you may be wondering if this horse has anything to do with our lovely carousel, over at Chippewa Park, south of Thunder Bay. The answer is no. It's entirely coincidental how this many decades.
If I might interrupt, I mean, for all those listening, this is one of the examples of sometimes technical hiccups where, for those of you who, I know we have some people from Grand Rapids, Michigan who've indicated they're here, but for those of you not familiar with the museum, it's in a 100-plus-year-old former police station and jail, and a lot of the collection area is behind a lot of rebar and concrete. So one of the things, Michael, is that your audio broke up a little bit just as you were launching in discussion about the horses.
Okay, I'll try again. All right. So, I was doing so good there. Oh well. All right. So this horse is, again, like I mentioned, it's not from Chippewa Park, like some of you may wonder. Again, Thunder Bay has a wonderful example of a carousel just south of the city at Chippewa Park. This horse is entirely coincidental how it ended up here. So this horse was actually in Andrew Coffey's clothing store on Brodie Street for many decades. Some of our listeners may have gone to that store in the past. And just to be clear, that's Coffey as in C-O-F-F-E-Y, not C-O-F-F-E-E. Andrew Coffey was one of those larger-than-life figures in Thunder Bay's history. He opened his store on Brodie Street in 1964, along with several other ones. And he was quite well known, quite a well-known and well-respected figure. In fact, he was well known for being good friends with Bob Hope, which is one of those interesting connections. He passed away quite recently in 2016. And of course, these horses ended up in our collection. Now, these, again, they're not C.W. Parker horses, as are the ones at Chippewa Park. These horses, we don't know for sure, but I have reached out to several carousel experts in the course of my work here, and as best as we can tell, these horses were made between 1910 and 1915, and most likely by the Herschel Spillman Company, which was based in North Tonawanda, New York, whereas, of course, C.W. Parker was based in Kansas. So they're similar, though, to Parker in that they're representative of the same style of carousel horse, which is to say the country fair style. Country fair carousels tended to be a little less elaborate, on the smaller side, and they were designed to be packed up and moved around quite frequently. They were typically found in the interior of North America, as opposed to in coastal regions. As opposed to some of the more elaborate styles like the Coney Island style and the Philadelphia style. We don't know exactly how it ended up, of course, in Thunder Bay in the first place, but likely these carousels were frequently broken up and sold in bits, and various horses got bought by so-and-so and so-and-so. I'm going to tell you a little bit about just carousel horses in general, just because I find this stuff really interesting. So take a look at this side of the horse. Well, you've already seen it. Scott, do you want to swing the camera around the other side there? So an interesting little tidbit about carousels is that in North America and mainland Europe, they generally spin counterclockwise, which means that horses face to the right, which means as opposed to in the United Kingdom where carousels spin clockwise. So that means that this side, not the side that we're looking at now, but the side that we were looking at initially, faces the outside of the carousel. And as such, it tends to be a little bit more elaborate, whereas the other side that you're looking at now tends to be a little bit more plain Jane, and you can probably see that. So the other side of the carousel, the right side, is often referred to as the romance side for that reason, and carousel horses are generally displayed facing to the right as they are here. There is a number of different types of carousel horses. This horse is a jumper, which is probably one of the more common types. As you can see, all 4 feet are in the air. It's jumping, and of course, these are the ones that go up and down on the carousel. The other kind would be a prancer, which has 2 back legs on the ground and 2 front legs in the air, and then standards, which have either 3 or 4 legs all on the ground. Another interesting thing about carousel horses is that they were not carved from a single block, but they were carved from a number of different blocks and all joined together, and you can actually see that. You can see there's very much a joining line right there. There's a joining line right there. And that joining line continues here and with the neck. So obviously this makes it a little bit more easier to carve than carving it all from a single piece. It also makes it a little sturdier. And yeah, so those of you, if any of you were in our museum in the fall, we did have a Chippewa Park carousel horse on display. His name was Bruner. And that horse, just to give you an update, is now being restored off-site. And hopefully it will be back on the Chippewa Park Carousel, if not this summer, at least next summer, because again, it's hard to say how things are shaping up right now. So, all right, that's all I got for carousel horses. Any questions on that?
Yeah, we actually have a couple questions that have come in. So the first one is why is there a stirrup only on one side?
That's a good question. Stirrups were largely a decorative feature. They actually aren't the greatest from a longevity perspective. In fact, one of the decisions that we made for the Chippewa Park Carousel restoration was to replace stirrups with, Scott, can you bring the camera around the other side? You can see there's a metal flange there attached to the pole. That's actually, even if it doesn't look as nice, it's actually a much more practical and durable option, not to mention safe as well. So again, that was the decision we made for this. So again, this horse kind of split the difference insofar as it has one flange on one side for safety and durability, and then a stirrup on another side, presumably just for heritage and aesthetic appearance.
So thanks, Michael. Another question is that does this horse have a name?
This horse does not. Maybe it did at some point. Maybe back when it was at Andrew Coffey's store, people called it, but we have no record of that in our collection, unfortunately. So, but if anyone wants to name it, they're welcome to suggest something.
So another question is the hair on the horse actual horsehair?
I don't know about this one in particular, but yes, many carousel horses do use actual horsehair, just because it looks better and it's challenging to get now from what I've heard. But yes, actual horsehair is definitely the preferred material to make carousel horse tails.
Another question is that are there any particular conservation concerns about storage when you have something like this in a collection?
I would say this artifact is relatively stable. I don't have any obvious concerns, apart from just keeping it in a well-preserved space in terms of, obviously we monitor humidity and temperature to keep things stable. It is painted, which means it is susceptible to light, but I mean, 99% of the time these lights are off, so there's really no concern here. The interesting thing, though, about carousels, particularly for for horses that are on operating carousels, is that you have that tension between there being being used as an amusement ride, but also they're being preserved for their heritage value. So it can be really tricky on how to balance those two things. And like we said earlier, switching out leather stirrups for flanges is one of those compromises that are often made to preserve these things going forward, for sure. But carousel horses, I mean, on operating carousels are extremely challenging just because they get so much use. The paint is constantly wearing down, even protected with varnishes, so there's a constant upkeep required. So that's a big part of the explanation for why the Chippewa Park carousel requires a lot of maintenance, which it is thankfully getting thanks to the Save Our Carousel campaign. So, yeah.
So we got two more questions, although they have nothing to do with the carousel horse. One of them is the spinning wheel that is just on the other side of the horse. Is that the one that was featured in the papers and records?
That is a good question. No, I believe the one that I wrote about in papers and records was this one. I can't, just give me 1 second. I'm going to sneak in here and look at our little tag. Yeah, that's it. So this is the carousel. My mind is still on carousel. This is the spinning wheel that was featured in papers records in 2018. And that was brought over by a Swedish immigrant whose name I don't recall because it's been a while since I wrote that paper. But yes, this is the one.
Okay. The other question has to do with something else that was in frame. That further down the aisle is what looks like a yellow dollhouse.
I confess I do not know a great deal about this. I mean, every so often I walk by here and I wonder about it, but I have not taken the time to check out the story on this. No doubt some of my colleagues who have been here longer than me could tell you this. That'll be the first, you're welcome to email me about that and I can tell you as best as I can answer.
Okay, well, thanks, Michael. That's all the questions for this stop.
All right, so Michael, I saw something that caught my eye. I grew up on a farm, so let's see these chainsaws, man.
So I can't tell you a ton about these. I do know that they are all circa 1940. So I believe that the 1930s was when chainsaws were started to become popularized as forestry tools. So these are relatively early on in the history of the mechanization of lumber. They were all used in bush camps in Thunder Bay and the surrounding area. And certainly, yeah, they're representative of the mechanization of the forestry industry that was accelerated even further in the 1940s and 50s with trucks being used in place of horses to cart lumber out of the bush. Do you want me to pick one up?
Oh, yeah.
All right. I'll pick one up without a chain.
Well, I say pick a heavy one. Come on.
So, yeah, this one obviously doesn't have a huge long bar on it. So obviously these were not designed for felling the largest, for felling any white pines or anything. But yeah, this one is a Pioneer 550cc.
Awesome.
No, that can't be 550cc. That's like a snowmobile engine, not a chainsaw engine.
Well, when you want to cut down the tree fast.
550 something, maybe 550 cube. No, that doesn't make sense either.
It might just be a model number.
Yeah, it could be.
So, Michael, what else is interesting on this aisle?
Sure. Yeah, so let's talk about these for a bit. These are our bound newspapers, and these are an incredibly important part of our collection. So we have both the Daily Times Journal, which is Fort William's paper, and the News Chronicle, which was Port Arthur's paper prior to amalgamation, from basically from the turn of the century. And we have a few papers that date back even before then. In the first few decades of Port Arthur and Fort William, there were all manner of different papers, like the Morning Herald and so on and so forth. But eventually, it was the News Chronicle and the Daily Times Journal that dominated the scene. So we have both of those papers up until about, basically up until amalgamation. So we're in the process of digitizing all of these bit by bit. We're actually partnering with the Thunder Bay Public Library on that, so we're certainly happy to partner with them to work on that project. And we scan them a page at a time. And we have a number of volunteers who help us with this because obviously it's not something that museum staff can do on a regular basis. And I may as well take the opportunity to thank all those volunteers for all their time. But what we do after we digitize them is we run them through an OCR software, and that allows them to be searchable. So you can just plug in a search term, whatever you're interested in. Chainsaws, for instance, if you want to find out about chainsaws in Thunder Bay, you could type that in, and you can search a year at a time, a decade at a time, a month at a time. And it's, as you can guess, it's an immensely valuable research tool. So we are right now in the mid-60s, if memory serves me correctly. Obviously, the project is on hold for a few months, but we're looking forward to welcoming our volunteers back to get the project started again.
So we got a couple. Oh, we got a couple questions actually. So one of them is how can the digitized versions be accessed?
Absolutely. So right now there are on a number of research computers in our library. So all you have to do, again, when we reopen, which we don't know when that will be, but get in touch with me or just email info@thunderbaymuseum.com, set up an appointment, and I will show you how to use the search tool, and I will just let you at it. So you can spend as much time as you want. So.
Okay, the person who asked that question says great, and they're going to be in touch with you in the next while. The other one, which is not a question, but actually I think this will be, even Scott will be happy, is how can someone volunteer to be involved in digitizing the newspapers?
Well, again, like Michael said, they could contact us at info@thunderbaymuseum.com, and our staff will work out how to best utilize their skills in scanning. Also, right now, they could visit the Volunteer Thunder Bay organization on their website and be able to sign up as a volunteer there as well.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
go ahead, Michael.
Can I mention one more thing relating to the last question? If it's a really simple thing, like you just want to find an article you already know the date, like I know this happened on this date, that's a simple thing where you can just email me and I can get that information to you in 30 seconds. So.
Okay. Another question that came up is that, I mean, with all that paper, I mean, are there certain kinds of things that are tricky for preservation?
Yeah, paper is obviously one of the more complicated things. So this is where we're really concerned about things like moisture to prevent any mold forming on them. Light's not so much an issue because they're well bound. They're not on display, obviously. They're stable for now, but we're really looking forward to having this all digitized. Not that we'll get rid of these or anything, but that obviously reduces our anxiety about them a little bit more because we'll have them on digital form, backed up in a whole bunch of different places, so they'll be preserved for a long time to come. But yes, paper is tricky for sure.
Now, the next question, I actually know the answer to. So someone asked basically where the records of the newspapers are kept. And, one of the things that's really unique about the collection that Michael has in front of him is that it's the only collection that still exists in its entirety of newspapers from the region. Even the microfilm that you get at the National Archives of Canada in Ottawa, they originally, way back a couple decades ago, used our collection in order to create those master microfilms. So if you go to the Thunder Bay Public Library or you go to any other place to access microfilm of the newspapers, the originals are actually what Michael is standing in front of.
Yeah, it's such an important collection, and as I've mentioned, from a research standpoint, it's invaluable. We have researchers come from other parts of the province or the country just to do nothing but look through these papers because they're so valuable. So, absolutely.
Now, even though we've been digitizing them, if someone does want to look at the originals because there may be something in them, I mean, is that still possible?
I would say by request, and it would kind of depend on how much staff time, because they're a little bit tricky to access, especially if you want one near the bottom of the stack. But it is possible in certain circumstances. I'll just put a qualifier on it like that.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions that I have for this stop.
Right.
Okay, folks, we're going to be migrating through the museum. So again, if you lose us connectivity-wise and we go dark, just be patient. We'll be back shortly because we do have to go down a hallway and up some stairs to get to our next area that Michael's going to be touring me through. But as we walk, if you guys have noticed that Michael's wearing gloves, and it's important as a curator and a museum professional to make sure that you're protecting the artifacts. So those gloves that he's wearing are made out of nitrile. They're hypoallergenic, but they're also designed to keep his bodily acids and sweat and grime off of the artifacts, and also keep any of the nasty grime from the artifact from getting on him. So as we go up the stairs here, bear with me, there's a bit of an echo in this area, but I'm going to keep talking so that at least you're not completely bored on our trip traversing the bowels of the museum. So as we come into the second floor of our storage area, we're going to go around the corner here, and I think Michael's got something to show me over here. I'm just going to do a sound check. Michelle, can you still hear us? Another sound check. Michelle, can you hear us?
Yes, sorry, yeah, for a minute there, I think I cut out. So your question?
We're just making sure that we were still live, just make sure we didn't lose the signal. So Michael, what do we have in front of us?
All right, so many of you may know what this is. This is an iron lung, which is a popular way of saying a negative pressure ventilator, which is, I guess, the more scientific term for it. So this was basically, it was used for a few different medical conditions, but obviously it's mostly associated with polio. What it does is it allows breathing, because of course polio is a disease that affects your muscle control, your ability to breathe on your own. So it allows people to breathe who are inside this chamber, of course, by lowering and raising the pressure inside the chamber to sort of force your body to breathe on its own. Obviously, it was not a very fun thing to be in, and which just speaks to what a difficult disease polio was. Patients spent varying amounts of time in them. In some cases, they were in them overnight. In other cases, they were in for 2 or 3 hours at a time, and then would be out for half an hour or something like that. It would all depend on the case and just how severe their case of the disease was. So again, it was used mostly for polio. Polio was a disease that pretty much affected most of the world from the early 20th century up until the 1950s, which is kind of when it peaked. I'm not an expert on this, so I'm open to corrections. I'm not a medical historian here. I sort of hemmed and hawed about whether to talk about it because, of course, these days no one's really in the mood for grim medical things. But on the other hand, I thought in a way it sort of represents a sort of optimism because throughout most of that period, the early 20th, the first half of the 20th century, polio was one of the most feared diseases out there. And through medical technology, through philanthropy, of course, and of course, ultimately through the development of a vaccine, while polio is not eradicated, polio is, I think it's a minuscule fraction of what it used to be. It's much less threatening to the world. And it's sort of a medical success story. And obviously, we're very grateful that we generally don't have to use these things anymore. So yeah. I thought I don't have a whole lot to say about that, but I just thought I'd make a brief stop here.
Okay, so we do have a couple questions. The first one is do we know what the incidence of polio were in Thunder Bay and the district?
I believe some research has been done on that. I don't have it in front of me, and I don't know where it is. But that's definitely something that I could put you in touch with someone, or I could answer that by email. It definitely did affect Thunder Bay, and there are definitely stories of people being affected by that disease here, and the devastating toll the disease took. The numbers, off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay. Another question has to do is, I mean, how did we get that in the collection? Do we know where it came from?
No, I tried to look to find the catalog information for this just before we started tonight. I should have given myself more time. I am not offhand certain. Presumably, it was either the Mccallum Hospital or Port Arthur General, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Or possibly St. Joseph's. But that's something I can get back to you on for sure. There must be cataloging information for it somewhere. So it's been on display in our collection a number of times. So.
Okay, so another question was, I'm not quite sure if you know the answer to this, but I mean, typically how many of these would have been in a hospital during the time that they were being used?
I wouldn't even hazard a guess. But I think I know where to look for that. So again, feel free to send me an email and I'll do what I can to answer that.
Yeah, and for those who have questions offline or would like follow-up, I mean, the best way to get in touch is to send an email to info@thunderbaymuseum.com, and it'll get directed to our curatorial staff, and they'll be able to follow up with you about those questions. Another question is there a lot of medical-related artifacts in our collection?
Yes, quite a bit. We have a whole number of medical tools, medical bottles, medical cases. A lot of it is actually on display right now at one of our satellite exhibits at St. Joseph's Hospital. Obviously, now is not the best time to go. I don't know how much longer it will be there, but we have an exhibit that we partnered with St. Joseph's on to display a lot of that collection. A lot of it was just large collections of artifacts from individual doctors in Thunder Bay, such as Dr. J.D. McIntosh and such. So yeah, we have a large amount of medical technology, medical equipment rather, in our collection. We also have some collection, another collection of medical technology in our recreation of a doctor's office on our first floor exhibits. If you stopped in there, so yeah.
I'll add that we are working on having a virtual tour of the museum. So check back with our website here in the next few weeks, and you might be able to actually take a little 3D tour inside the doctor's office. Any other questions for us at this stop, Michelle?
No, that's the last for this stop.
Okay.
All right. Well, Michael, what other cool stuff you got to show us?
Well, this, I'm not going to stop here, but this is a selection of our large collection of textiles, but I'm not going to say too much about that right now because 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking way more about our textiles in our collection. So stay tuned for that, but we'll move on for now.
Now, one question that did come up is that, you know, whereabouts in the museum are you? Are you in the older section or the newer extension right now?
So we're all in the newer section. So we're basically in the middle of that big windowless block to the right of the museum. So that was the addition that was built to house all this collection storage.
So
yeah.
And earlier you were in the basement area.
Yes, but that was also the basement of the new section. That's right. I still get a little disoriented in this building. It's a weird building.
How many floors of storage space do we have?
So 3 floors of storage space. So the floor we were at before, this floor, the one above us is where our archives are. So that's paper artifacts essentially. We're not going to stop there because I think there's enough to talk about here, and boxes on shelves aren't that exciting. But also I should mention the Wendell Beckwith collection going back a whole month from tonight is on that floor as well.
So what do we got, Michael?
All right. So let's talk about this. So this, as you can see, is a model. Ignore the fish in the background, but we will get to that. So this is a model. Some of you may know this is White Otter Castle. So this is a fairly well done model that we accepted into our collection not too long ago. So yeah, I mean, I just mentioned Wendell Beckwith. We talked about him 4 weeks ago. But Jimmy Mchugh is the other interesting character that our collection relates to, who also lived alone in the wilderness. He was obviously different in many ways from Wendell. He wasn't a scientist or anything. He was a humble trapper, but he was remarkable for building this incredible structure. It is a 4-story log cabin. That's correct, 4-story log cabin. It's 29 feet tall. And he built this entirely by himself. And I should clarify here that he did not build this near a road. He built this on White Otter Lake, which is about halfway between Atikokan and Ignis. It is not easy to get to, although it's a little bit easier coming from the south. But either way, you need a canoe or a snowmobile to get there. And you're looking at several days' journey. So this is a remarkable thing. He felled and lifted all of these red pine logs himself. He used a block and tackle mechanism to raise them up. You can just imagine how challenging that was at the top of that little tower. He was a trapper. Like I said, he was born in Quebec. He started building this in 1903. And so with Jimmy, there is all sorts of myths and legends that go along with him. One of the popular things was that he built this to impress a woman that he had courted from Scotland. Although a different version of the story is that it was essentially a mail order bride. But the story holds that he built this just to sort of impress her, show her that her trip overseas to come be his wife was worth it from her perspective. I think the veracity of that account is in some doubt. Another legend, and I think this one is maybe closer to the truth, is that he was told early in his life that he would never amount to anything, and that he built this castle as a way of showing how wrong that person was. Although, of course, not many people, if anyone, actually saw him while he was alive. So this story comes to a fairly sad end in 1918 when Jimmy's body was found. It was assumed that he drowned while netting fish in the lake. And that was the end of that. The castle, of course, still exists today, although weather has taken its toll on it. It has had several restoration efforts over the many decades. And it is still accessible. Again, you pretty much need a canoe or a snowmobile, depending on the time of year, and it's going to be a trek to get there. We do have an archival collection that is nearing completion of processing that relates to this incredible structure. And I should also mention that the Atikokan Museum has a decent collection of material relating to Jimmy Mchugh as well. So any questions on that?
Yeah, a couple of questions, but also a couple of fun facts that people might be interested in. There was a bit of a discussion about that. A couple of people who are listening to this have canoed the area. So for those of you who are wondering, it is White Otter is accessible from Clearwater. So if you go to Browns and you basically head north across the lake, do it in the morning, not in the afternoon, because it's a little bit windy and choppy in the afternoon. And then you go all the way to the end of White Otter. That's where the location is. It's also a provincially designated area. So there's actually an Ontario government provincial plaque that outlines it. And another fun fact is round the corner from it, if you sort of keep hugging the shore, is actually a German POW sub-camp. So POWs who were in the Atikokan camp were dispatched there to be involved in the lumber industry. Another thing that individuals might be interested in is one of our longtime members, Eleanor Barr, wrote a short booklet a number of years ago outlining the history of White Otter Castle. So some of you may be interested in that. The one question that was had, though, is that in the model, the color of it is gray, but in real life, those a couple people who have been there said it's not gray. Any insight into that?
Yeah, no, that is true, and I wondered about that. I mean, I haven't been myself, although I hope to. And for all the pictures I've seen, the logs are fairly dark brown. I don't know if maybe the theory was that he had it painted at some point, although, but that may just have been that this is how the model looks good. So I'm not sure, but yes, in real life, I believe as it is right now, it's very much a dark brown cabin.
Someone else has also contributed and sent in saying that there's also a YouTube video by Peter Elliott that Eleanor Barr consulted on. That if you type in White Otter Castle in YouTube, there's a video there that you can learn a little bit more about it.
Great, yeah, and thank you for bringing up Eleanor's book as well. That was I should have mentioned that earlier. That's a fantastic. Eleanor has done so much research on this, and of course she was the one who donated this archival collection, and I believe actually that archival collection does reference that Peter Elliott film in there as well. So some of the background research is all in there.
Okay, thanks, Michael. That's all the questions for this stop.
All right, so Michael, there's a fish behind this thing. Why is the fish with it?
Well, the fish doesn't really have anything to do with White Otter Castle. It just happens to be on the same shelf. So this is a brook trout. So let's talk a little bit about brook trout. This is something I've done some research on. I just find it a really interesting topic. So as many of you also know, this area, in particular the Nipigon River, is a very big deal for brook trout. In fact, it has been and continues to be probably the number one fishery for brook trout in the world. It was a world-famous destination really going back all the way to the 1870s and 1880s, but probably the 1900s and 1910s were what we might call the golden age of fishing for brook trout on the Nipigon River. It was famous for having a number of royal visitors. Probably the most well-known, of course, is Edward, Prince of Wales, who visited there in 1919. A good deal has been written about that. This was, of course, several decades before his brief and controversial reign as the King of England. But this fish was caught by a relative of His Royal Highness Prince Arthur of Connaught. This is not the Prince Arthur for whom Port Arthur is named. That was his father, Prince Arthur, the Duke of Connaught. This is, of course, his son, who then logically was the grandson of Victoria, and also the cousin of George V. I hope I have that right. The British monarchy could sometimes get confusing. So he visited the area in August of 1918, and he spent about 3 days fishing on the river. So he went to the area via the Canadian Northern Railway from Port Arthur on, of course, his own special train, which was common for royal visits. First, he went to Nipigon, and then from there north to Orient Bay, which was sort of the jumping-off point for most fishing excursions on the Nipigon River. Of course, there are a number of lodges there as well. That particular train line is no longer active north of Port Arthur, rather. So actually, I was able to find a Daily Times Journal article from the day after that trip that sort of summarized it, because, of course, this is a pretty big deal for a lot of people. It's interesting because the article that I found actually references that the royal train made a stop near Dorian, where a farmer presented the party with fresh strawberries. I don't know if that was a planned thing or just sort of random. But yeah, just a neat little way. Royal visits were and continue to be a fairly big deal for people. So this fish is not a huge fish by any stretch, but it's decent enough. I mean, anyone would be proud to catch it today. And we'll talk a little bit more about the size of fish on the Nipigon in a little bit. So this fish mount, also you probably can't see on the camera, but it was also on there is William McCurdy's name. William McCurdy was the outfitter in Nipigon. He was also the overseer of the fishing in that area. He's also well known for inventing McCurdy's fly repellent, which we have several bottles of in our collection, and undoubtedly that was very important to deal with the swarming of bugs in the area, while to sort of keep your mind on fishing. So let's use this fish as a jumping off point to talk about two other fish.
Michael, can I steal the show for a moment? If my mom is watching, we have to look at this printer down here. This printer is Image Writer 2. I don't know if everybody can see it real well on the camera, but this is from my childhood. I spent a lot of time trying to write high school papers on a dot matrix printer. So, all right, we'll go back to the tour, but I wanted to point that out for my mother on the tour.
Thank you for that brief interlude.
Well, Michael, another fun fact, that I'm not quite sure which members of the royal family exactly there, but there are pictures in our collection of members of the Prince of Wales. I don't know which one it is, actually fishing on Lake Nipigon and the river system associated with it.
Yes, yeah. I think I know the one you talked about. I've definitely seen photos of the party. I don't know if I've actually seen a photo of the prince fishing himself, but I would assume if there was a photo, we would have it. So that's for sure. And again, if anyone's interested, I can email you photos if you're interested in those. So thank you. So these are two fish, as you can see. This is a different type of fish mount. This is a relatively common way of displaying fish back in that time. Obviously, we don't see it too much anymore, but they were mounted on birch bark. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But any of you reading that label already kind of got the story here. So these fish were caught by the famous Dr. Cook of Fort William, Ontario. So this Dr. Cook, of course, caught the world record brook trout on the same stretch of river in 1915. And the world record brook trout was 14.5 pounds. And that is an absolute monster. I mean, these fish by comparison are 5 pounds and 6.5 pounds, respectively, by comparison. So, I mean, 14 pounds, that's a monster brook trout. We're talking more lake trout territory there. So, in fact, I think the story holds that he actually thought he had reeled in a lake trout when he first got that bite. So that brook trout record has never been beaten since 1915. That fish is not here. It's at the Nipigon Museum. Unfortunately, it was involved in a fire some decades ago, and even though it's still there, it's heavily damaged and just not what it was. It's also shrunk quite a bit, so it doesn't really capture just how big of a fish a 14-pound brook trout would have been. There has been a lot of, I mean, there's all kinds of fascinating stories about this. There's been a lot of controversy about that fish. In fact, there's a theory out there that there was another side of the fish that was on a different mount somewhere else. But I think, from what I can tell, and again, this is controversial, so maybe we'll get some conflicting opinions, but I think that's been thoroughly debunked because as I understand it, you need more than half of a fish to make one of these. You actually need a little bit more. So you couldn't actually make two skin mounts out of one fish, if I have that correct.
Yeah, and at the Thunder Bay Museum, it was not too long before you were hired, Michael. At the 100th anniversary, they had a brook trout festival in Nipigon, and it was held at the Legion. And the museum was there, and a number of other organizations, and there were presentations. And an individual who's an expert on it, whose name I cannot remember, talked about the fact as well that you can't have both sides because there is not the technology or where there's technology available to split a fin in half. So when you look at the dorsal and top fin, you cannot actually have it split to appear on two sides.
Yeah. Was that Rob Swainson, Michelle?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, it really is interesting. So anyway, I think that the theory of the other world record brook trout mount has been debunked, but who knows, maybe one day it'll turn up. So these two, the interesting thing about them, he caught these several days later, and they were caught on the same cast. And how you would do that is just by having two different tippets. The tippet is the very, very thin line at the end of a fly line, or the almost invisible line that the actual fly would be attached to. Because, of course, if you attach a fly to the main fly fishing line, the fish would see it and obviously not strike. So, yeah, he caught these on the same cast. And, they're still, I mean, obviously, comparison to 14 pounds, they're pretty small, but still decent fish Anyone would be happy to catch them today. They're probably on the upper limit of what you'd expect to catch in the river today. So these are mounted on birch bark, and they are a complicated thing. I mean, as you can see, we've talked a little bit about conservation already. These are a little worse for wear, especially the upper one. So what's happened is that the skin has dried out over time, which has resulted in it tearing, of course, and then so it's not in the greatest shape. And this has happened over the course of the century that this mount has been not necessarily here, but in existence.
I'll add that in the museum world, we call this kind of inherent vice. So that means that the artifact in itself is actually eating itself. So the fact that there's birch bark in there, it's mounted in a case with wood, there's lots of acid that's probably eating away at those skins. So even the best efforts of the curatorial staff are just going to slow this sort of decay down because of the inherent vice in that artifact.
Yeah, I actually reached out to the Canadian Conservation Institute several years ago to talk about this, and just to see if there's anything we could do. They said that apart from stabilizing it as best you can, there's really not much you can do. Like Scott said, it is inherent to the nature of the artifact, this kind of degradation over time.
So I don't know if both of you have relatives that have the same sense of humor, or if it's just some of our attendees watching. But there has been now 3 comments saying that both of you know how to tell whoppers of fish stories.
We appreciate their humor.
Yes.
So are there any other questions for this area?
No, that comment was it.
Yeah.
Well, all right. 3 whoppers it is.
I have a little bit to add, just to sort of to wrap up the story of the brook trout. I know we're pushing time a little bit, but by the 1920s, the fishery on the Nipissing River was already on the decline, which led to the need for conservation measures and fishing limits. The river had 3 dams constructed also over the course of the 20th century: the Cameron Falls Dam, the Alexander Dam, and the Pine Portage Dam, which radically changed the river flow. But there still is a good brook trout fishery today, although there are probably no 14-pound monsters floating around in there. So, yeah.
All right. So, Michael, what else can we see in the storage area that's cool?
For sure. Well, I think maybe the last thing, just going back to 2 weeks ago, we talked about ship models. So let's just come over to where ship models are.
Hey, whoa. What is this banner? This thing is really cool. I love this color contrast.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, this, I'm just going to lift it up a little bit. As you can see, this is a banner from the Canadian Lakehead Expedition, popularly known as the CLE from 1961, as you can see, for a cow. And yeah, this was actually quite interesting. It was awarded to John Chappell. John Chappell, of course, was the son of Clement Chappell, who gave his name to Chappell's Department Store, which was for many, many decades the anchor of the Fort William commercial area, and was intended to be the anchor for the Victoria Millville Mall, but that's a whole other story. And also gave his name to the Chappell's golf course. So John worked for his father both in Fort William and in Geraldton. He spent much of his life, though, as a cattle breeder. This is a thing that not too many people know about him. And from about the 40s to the 60s, he was one of the most prominent cattle breeders in northwestern Ontario. And actually, we have an archival collection from John that describes this in great detail. I believe the number is A61. Don't worry about that. But yeah, so it's got documents from his life, including all kinds of records about milk production, the type of breeds, lineages, and also a diary of his cattle breeding activities. So after his retirement, John was an alderman in Fort William. So that's what these are.
Fascinating.
That's pretty cool, Michael.
Yeah.
Whoa, slow down. So, okay, I saw it, and then all of a sudden there was a question that came up going, the museum has board games?
We do. We have a number of them. There's some really interesting ones. Let's see what we got. We got Clue, except it's VCR mystery. So I guess you play something on your VCR. I've never done this. and interact with it somehow.
Yes, youngster.
So there was, as in a weird aside, which may say more about me than the museum, there also was a VCR Star Trek: The Next Generation game at one point.
All right. Good to know. Well, that's 2 Star Trek references tonight. So, how does it work though? Do you just pause and play all the time?
Yeah. So what you would, it was like a storyline. So once you played the game once, that was it. You couldn't play it again. But yeah, so you would pause it and then you would play a part, and then at certain points in the game it would say unpause, and then there'd be a Klingon or something that would come up and sort of yell at you, and then you'd proceed to the next part of the board game.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Fascinating. But yeah, no, we do collect board games. Obviously, we have to be a little selective about it, but we do have a Trivial Pursuit. I assume that's a relatively early version of it.
Seeing a 1984 on there, so.
Oh, not that early then.
Well, you and I might lose at that one.
But yes, no, we have a number of board games. We actually got a few more a few years ago that haven't been processed yet. But yeah, we have board games, and we have.
Well, it's got some scary marionettes
We got
up
some
here.
marionettes. And like any museum, we have a good collection of creepy dolls.
Although someone did just add in a comment saying when they saw the marionette, said that you're clearly not clowning around.
Oh boy.
Somebody's missing their calling, I think, in the comedy club. So, Michael, we said we were going down here to see ships, right?
Well, yeah, I just thought we closed by just going back 2 weeks to my webinar on ship models. I remember someone asked how many we had. I still haven't counted, but this many.
Hang on, folks. I'm going to get there slowly so I don't give everyone seasickness as I move the camera too fast.
So obviously we're just looking at boxes, so it's not exciting. But again, I just wanted to give a sense of the breadth of our collection of ship models. Here's the Aaron that I talked about. What else do we have? We've got...
Well, I see a cool one. I can see if I can get the camera to it.
Do you want me to bring it out?
Yeah, if you can do it safely.
It's a little dusty. But remember I talked about the model of the Bismarck? This is one of them.
That is cool.
I mean, it's incredibly elaborate, and again, made entirely from wood. Again, apologies, it's a little dusty. We haven't found a container for this one yet, but.
No, Michael, what you're referring to, is that one of the ones that was made by German POWs in the region?
I think so. I'm reasonably confident because there's a label that refers to it, but I could not find exact cataloging information for this one prior to the start of the lecture. And because of that, I didn't want to make a claim that wasn't backed up. So I think so, but I'm not 100% sure on it.
So someone's actually just written in asking roughly how long or big is the Bismarck model, just to give a bit of size comparison.
Sure. I would say 3 feet.
Thank you.
So decent size. But again, this is not the one that I mentioned that has the radio hidden inside, which again is a totally unconfirmed story, but would be cool. So yeah.
Oh, so another question just came in actually. Is there any connections to any of the model ships that we have to the shipyards that operated in the area?
There must be, but I don't know for sure. Let me just see if I can. Oh, we have one of the Titanic. Rig of War, cruiser, passenger liner. That's the Warrior. We talked about the Warrior. That's the schooner. There's the HMCS Port Arthur.
So the HMCS Port Arthur was built at the dockyards in the Second World War in town.
Yeah. You know what? Hang on a sec. This one looks like it's. If this one's not filled with packing peanuts, you can see it. It's.
Is it a ghost?
It's hidden by crumpled paper.
Oh well,
for protection.
It is well protected, and
you'll have to trust me that it's there.
Someone wrote in and said maybe the next time you do a behind the scenes, we could look at some more of the ship models.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, ship models could be another 5 webinars if we wanted to do.
So Michael, is that it for tonight?
That's all I got, but again, I'm open to more questions.
Just going to have a look to see. So actually, a question just came in about, since I think just because of where you're standing, do we have quite a selection of model trains in our collection?
We do. Though I am not an expert on model trains, but I do know exactly who to ask. And Frank, if you're watching, the question you asked me a few weeks ago, I think I may have an answer to, but I will text you about that. So, but yes, we have a number of model trains in our collection. I believe it's more than just here, but yes, we definitely do.
So this question must be from someone in the museum field. So they were asking a question about what we do or what we can do about plastic and how it degrades.
So this is, I'll take this one. This is Scott again. So this is one of the big challenges in the whole museum field. It kind of depends on the type of plastic. It depends on its original chemistry. So your older plastics that contained like nitrates in them there's kind of no hope. There's just keep it cool, keep it dry, and hope you get another 50 years out of it. More modern plastics or polyethylenes are going to last for 1,000 years. But then there's all the mixtures. There's polyurethane plastics, polystyrenes, and a lot of consumer products are made out of these kind of cheaper and less chemically stable plastics. And unfortunately, that is the big challenge in the museum world, is how do we deal with that? Because aside from kind of invasive chemical treatments, there really isn't much to do other than slow down the progress of that degradation. And it's another one of those issues of inherent vice, like we kind of talked about with the fish. Some of those plastics have an inherent vice with them, that they're just not chemically stable. And a lot of the products that we have made out of them were meant to be temporary things. They're meant to be used for a short while and then not survive for very long and not be used for very long. So they, the manufacturers didn't intend for them to last 1,000 years. And so some of those plastics just won't. It also comes down to the advancement of chemistry. Now that we have more modern polyethylene plastics, like the plastic bags you get at the grocery store, or some of your more durable, boats and some other products, those plastics are going to last a long time and won't be a concern for museum conservators. But a lot of those others, they are a challenge. And I feel for all my brethren in the museum community that have to try to deal to preserve those, and especially those complex objects that are multiple types of plastics. There's just not a good answer right now other than keep it cool, keep it dry. And of course, we've got to take care of Nemo.
So a couple questions and a suggestion. One suggestion someone's written in is for us to think about doing a webinar and maybe items from the collection that relate to the Indigenous history of the region. So I thought I'd just pass that along. Another question came, and this one's more of a fun one, is that do we have a wiffle bat in the collection?
So we're going to try to find it. So everyone bear with me as the camera starts to move. So Michael seems to think there might be one around. We're going to go on a little trip down one of these aisles, maybe, folks.
And for the record, that's an honest question. It's not just me being me.
Of course. I'm not.
But in seriousness, while you and Michael are searching through, is there a large collection of material relating to the sports history of the region at the museum?
So there is some. However, a lot of the sports material is held by one of our sister organizations, the Northwest Ontario Sports Hall of Fame. But we do have quite a bit of sports material in the collection. Maybe Michael can answer that a little bit better than I.
Yeah, definitely. We do have some. Actually, and I haven't been able to find a wiffle bat, but email info at Thunder Bay Museum, and I will plug it in our catalog and see what comes up. Yeah, so again, obviously the Northwestern Ontario Sports Hall of Fame is sort of the big collector of sports material. Here's an interesting thing down here. This is the first curling rock that was brought over to Thunder Bay, or Fort William at the time. I don't remember the details on this. I did write an exhibit, a label about it a few years ago. But yeah, it was brought over from Scotland. And as you can see, it's obviously not quite as perfect as modern curling rocks. This is a thing where conservation concerns, obviously, if we were to pick this up, we would never grab it by the handle. We would always pick it up like this because who knows how much that handle has corroded over time. So
we've got another question that might get you moving again. It's either someone who knows the collection or saw it while you're walking by, but someone seemed to have seen a Commodore, an Eagle portable PC, and maybe a Friden electronic calculator when you were moving through things.
All right.
God, this is you.
We're gonna get to our 1980s, maybe late 1970s, early 1980s computer and video game tech. Was it down this one or was it down the other one? Right there. So maybe is this what? Yeah, there we go. There is some old school computers. You want to touch a button and wait 5 minutes for a reaction. That is your machine.
So a follow-up question to that is actually, when you have technology like this, is it kept in working order or is it essentially not after a certain point?
So, turning some of these machines on would actually count as consumptive use. So that's a concept in the museum world as well, where we don't actually try to use a artifact for its original purpose. So by energizing the circuits in these artifacts, we would basically be putting them at risk of having a short circuit or wearing out some electronic components inside. So that would be consuming the object for its use. So it's something we actually don't do as a policy.
So someone else has noticed something in the collection and has asked, is there any really special clocks?
There probably are. I actually thought about sort of researching that for this, but didn't get around to it. But undoubtedly, we do have some. The clocks are just over here. I can't tell you about any of them, but we do have some absolutely beautiful clocks.
I'll just move the camera around and get you close to some of them as best I can do in some of the dim light conditions.
So maybe we should add that to the list that next time you do a behind the scenes, maybe have a bit of a focus on some of the clocks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we just added about 4 of these.
So I'm just going to remind everyone that if you do have any questions, now would be the time to put them through the Q&A so I can ask Michael and Scott about anything. The last question that I have in the hopper currently has to do with paintings and whether or not there are, do we have a lot of historic paintings in the collection?
We do. They're obviously, well, actually, you can just turn the camera over that way. This is where some of our historical art is kept on these special racking system just for it. Although we have many other paintings that are stored upstairs on a different type of art storage system, which is basically just a mesh screen that allows you to sort of hang artifacts face out on display. Probably the most notable historical paintings that come to mind would be William Armstrong, who was a painter of this region. He came through this area and spent a lot of time painting scenes in this area in the 1850s, 60s. Michelle?
That's about right.
For Billy Armstrong?
I offhand can't remember, but that sounds about right.
But yeah, I don't have any. There's some upstairs, but there's none here that I know exactly where they are. But certainly, when it comes to historical paintings, his name comes to mind the most. His paintings have made it to a lot of historical books about the region as well. So, for sure.
Yeah, I was just going through it. I picked up one of the many books that Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society has published over the years, and some of the Armstrong paintings we have in our collection, they range from 1857 to 1870. So, I mean, that was his most active years.
Yeah, and I believe the museum did a display of his artwork some years ago in partnership with the Thunder Bay Art Gallery.
Yeah. Yeah, and many individuals will be probably most familiar with William Armstrong, where his paintings of the Red River expedition and the Wolseley expedition are probably some of the ones that those in the region are most familiar with, particularly the paintings that encompass what Wolseley had renamed Prince Arthur's Landing. We do have another question from a few people. One is do we have any group of 7 works in the collection?
Not that I'm aware of, but it would be really cool to find.
Another question is actually a suggestion, it would be a webinar that might be kind of interesting is to be looking at the music and historical recordings that we may have in the collection.
Absolutely. I'll get right on it. No, that would be a really cool webinar for sure.
Yeah, and that's it for questions. So, I mean, we'll give it a couple seconds just in case there's a delay. I'm going to flip to the slide so they can still see you, Michael and Scott. So, no, don't necessarily do anything.
We started dancing already.
There we go. So if there is no more questions, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I'd like to also, in particular, thank members of the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society. It's without our members that our activities, both these webinars as well as our regular day-to-day activities and preserving and protecting our past are not possible. I'd like to thank the City of Thunder Bay, Government of Canada, Government of Ontario, Lakehead University's Department of History, and if Andrew Brigham is online, I apologize to all of the technology service people at Lakehead, but also this has been made possible over the last 2 months by Lakehead University's Technology Service Center and the ability to bring these things live to you. And this is completely wrong in terms of the slide I'm showing you. So ignore what's coming up next week. Next week is actually Dr. David Ratz, who will be talking about the history of the military in this region during the First World War. So it is about the First World War, but it's about the general history of the military. So that would be Dr. David Ratz, 7 p.m. next Wednesday. In the meantime, go to www.thunderbaymuseum.com. Check out our online exhibits, the car raffle, learn more about the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society, and by all means, if you do have any questions about anything that you've seen about the collection, wanting to do research, just write info@thunderbaymuseum.com, and the curatorial staff will get back to you. And also, if you do have any suggestions about any future webinars and behind the scenes, please do also send that along. So until next time, thank you very much. Merci, Chimegwech, and we will see you all in a week's time. Have a great evening.